You'll see this color wheel. Just a real basic review on color theory. On a color wheel, we have the red, yellow, and blue are primary colors. And then we have our secondary colors between those, orange, violet, and green. The mixtures of the primaries. And then we can, of course, we can add white to the colors, or black and white on the back. If you have this color wheel, it shows you what happens when you tint. When we tint a color, we call it, when we add white to a color, we call it tinting. When we add black, we call it, we're shading the color. But with these basic primaries, you can mix a lot of colors. And if you notice on my palette, what I've had you all do is get basically primary. So I've got my white down here, over here. This is how I set my palette up. And however you set your palette up, however you do it, it's up to you. But make sure, however you do it the same way every time. Don't keep changing it. So I go kind of from light to dark, warm to cool around the color wheel. But I've got my white, and then I've got two yellows. This first one's sort of like a Hansa or lemon yellow. This second one is a regular cadmium yellow or cad yellow medium. You can see, I don't know if the camera's picking this up. This will be interesting to see what this camera picks up with color. But you see one's a little cooler. The Hansa yellow or the yellow light is a little cooler. And the yellow cad yellow is a little more intense. I do have one other, got to make sure I get this. A couple.
What is your cad yellow? Light, medium, or dark?
I think this one is just a, let me see here. I think this one that you're seeing is cad yellow medium.
Thanks.
And then the lighter yellow is lemon yellow. There's another yellow that I like to use. It's this one's a Gamblin, but it's transparent earth yellow. Transparent yellow. I stuck that up here in my modified colors. I have some modified colors over here. I'll get to those. So then I have a couple of reds here. This is Cad Red Light. And this one here, either of the Alizarin Crimson, which is up here, or Winsor Red Deep. The Winsor Red Deep is a color that is a Winsor Newton. Matter of fact, I got these two colors. I was working with Jeff Hine a little bit a few years ago. He uses these a lot in his portrait. A lot of other people do too, but this is a red deep that's a little more of a transparent that works really well for skin tones. It's called Winsor Red Deep. I recommend if you like to pick it up. And that along with the this yellow, transparent yellow, oxide yellow. Sometimes they call it, this is transparent earth, or you can call it transparent oxide yellow. That's a darker yellow, but it's a very transparent yellow, which seems to work well. And then I've got a couple blues here. Well, I've got this in ultramarine blue, or you could use, say, like a what's the other blue? Not the phthalo blue. I would kind of stay away from the phthalo blue with portrait work. The phthalo blue is just way too powerful to be working with that. Yeah, stay away from the phthalo blue. But the other one, it's just, I'm having a little brain freeze right now, is the other blue, which is cobalt. Cobalt's kind of a nice one that you could have for one of your blues. I actually, sometimes I'll use a lighter blue like a cerulean. So sometimes you might want to use a blue that's a little bit more suited for making some variations on the light side of the face. So if we were to make that stay a little better. Sometimes I'll just have a pile of blue ready to go that's mixed up with some white, because the problem, if you want to cool off an area in your light side of your skin tones over here, then you're going to be putting a lot of dark over there. That blue is so dark, so if you get a light blue, it's kind of nice to use that way. I think before I forget, I think, oh, I already posted. I was going to just, yeah, I got to remember to post. I was just going to show you guys, because some of you will be working with Matt. Or the photograph of Matt. I'll be posting these, but I've got this one here. And I'll post these. So you guys can see these, since some of you might be working with Matt. And I've just got different versions of him that I've done. And I've already posted that other one, the video that I did of him. So I'll make sure I post these. Here's a profile that I did of him. Starting to work some color into it. So I'll put those out there to remind me to post those. And so basically red, yellow, and blue in the warm and cool. Over here I have a burnt umber. It's like a modifier color. Another modifier color is your burnt sienna. I try not to use much of that when I start to get into color. Here's actually a light green. This is another nice kind of a cool color. It's like a green. It's like a cad green light. Because if you get the dark greens, sometimes it's just too dark, and so sometimes I like to use that. And then there's the yellow ochre. I'm sorry, the not the yellow ochre, the transparent oxide yellow. This one. You can see that it's a little more transparent. If we add some white to it, it's a darker yellow, which is kind of nice. We can use it sometimes in the shadows. Okay, so now if you want to work from a real limited palette, we can try what we call the Zorn palette. Anders Zorn, as was shared with the art historians and such, that he would basically use like a red, like probably one of these, like a Alizarin crimson, or maybe like this Windsor red. And a yellow, like either a yellow ochre or one of these yellows, white, and black. You'd have a black over here. So with that limited value, the limited palette, you can actually mix quite a few colors. And I'll show a little bit of that. I'll put a little bit of my black over here. I generally don't like using black when I do portraits. Problem with teaching with black is if I tell the students to paint with black in their portraits, then they tend to just mix that with all their colors to kind of desaturate the colors, and then it just starts to turn into mud, just muddy. So you have to be very careful if you do that. But I'll show you some basic principles when I'm mixing some things up here. And again, looking for some overall things in the coloration of the face. And when you start with color, there's as you've seen in some of those videos, you can start just piecemealing it, like here's a color here, match this color, what's the color up here, match it. You can do that where you start to put spots of color. I know this is how I was taught, and Elodie will know this with Paul Davis up at the U. He would have us do little splotches, of color and build them up over top of our underpainting like this. He would build them up in spots all over. And so it's kind of like a TV screen coming into focus with all the pixels. There's others that will cover a whole area with a mother, color, and then break that mother color down to other colors and keeping everything very simple. I might show a little bit of that. So there's different approaches with adding color. I'll just try to demonstrate a couple of those different ideas here. But, where to start, that's always a good question, where to start, We look at the values in the photo reference here, or the colors. We can see some flesh tones here. One thing I want you to notice right away for really all individuals, and especially even regardless of a race, you'll notice that in the forehead area, you're going to have a lot of bony structure. So whatever the flesh tone is up there, it's going to be a little cooler in temperature. Now, if you come here in the section where the nose and the cheeks and the eyes, that's where a lot of the flesh and a lot of blood vessels are right here in the face, and all the fleshy parts where it's filling in the skeleton areas and the tip of your nose. It's all cartilage, and there's, so there's a lot of more blood vessels. So you're going to get more of a warmish feel in this area. And then down here, you're back to the bone structure again, where you've got a lot of bone showing with the chin and in some of these areas. So in the chin area, it gets a little cooler again. So it kind of goes cool, warm, cool. Now there's a lot of variation between those. And, as you saw when I did this portrait of Matthew, that's posted, this particular portrait, this is the one that's posted in Canvas to watch the video. You notice that if the camera picks this up, and I pushed this on purpose, I pushed this to more than I was probably seeing on him, but you can see, even though this is a cool area, the hat's showing a little shadow here, in the forehead, you see how I've got it warmer here, and then it's a little cooler down here where the chin is, and that happens. It's a subtle thing, very subtle. But you notice that there's a variation here where I can go in, and there are in this area here, around the eye, I can see some cool notes. See that kind of greenish color I'm using, that bluish color? I'm pumping it just to show make the point that there are variations of warms and cools. So we're juggling a number of balls here all of a sudden. The flesh tones, the cheek area, the nose, a little bit warmer as it moves back into space, just like like when you're doing plein air out in the landscape. Things that go away from us. If we want to show something that's turning the form away from us, we can cool it off. And so it makes it feel like it's moving away. Things that are warmer will appear to come forward. Things that are cooler will appear to go backwards. I remember, some of you might be old enough to remember the old Hansa Planetarium. And they used to do these laser light shows. They used to do Laser Floyd and laser Led Zeppelin at, late nights on Friday and Saturday. Go into these laser light shows. This is before all the computer stuff. But they would have a green laser light, a red laser light, a yellow laser light, and a blue laser light. And the way that they could get those lasers to look in three-dimensionality when you put on your 3D glasses is, guess what color laser was in front of you, right? Came close to you, right? It was the red lasers. And the blue laser beams are back in the distance. So it gave whatever they were drawing with their laser beams up there, it gave a sense of depth. So they were even using the same principles in light. Well, they do the Doppler effect too, and Longo could probably tell us all about the Doppler effect in astronomy with warm and cool. Anyway, that's enough for another day. But warm and cool. So we don't see a lot of that sometimes happening in the photo references, right? but it is there. If you can see this, can you guys see the warm? I don't know if the camera's picking this up, but if you can see your own booklet, see the warm in her cheeks and how it's just a little greenish. I see a bit of a greenish cooling off down underneath where, you know, above her lip and down here on her chin area. Can you guys see that? I've registered as green, and it's not green like the shirt of Matt's shirt there. But it's a subtle thing. This is what you want to start looking for, and they're just subtle shifts in really color. So if you can understand color, value, and color temperature, you'll be all right. So there's a lot of things we're juggling, and don't think we have to learn this all in one day. Speaking of Jeffrey Hein, he'll spend a whole year on just color, and you have to spend a whole year on black and white and drawing before you even get to that. So 2 years actually. So the one thing is let me give you just just take a couple notes here. So breakdown in mixing color. Three things, okay? Remember, we're going to go up to match a color. We're going to go up here and match a color on here, and I'm going to do it here. Yes, there is actual painting involved here. Hang with me here. There's a purpose in all this. So the first thing we want to do is ask ourselves, what color is it that we're trying to match? And you have three choices. Do any of you know what your three choices are? These are absolutely your only three choices to start what color you're going to start with. What are they? There's a primary song, folks, if any of you know the primary song.
It's either red, yellow, or blue.
Yeah, red, yellow, or blue. So you have to ask yourself, is the cheeks here, is that a red? Is it a yellow? Or is it a blue? And you might even say, even remotely close to the family. Well, is there any blue in their face? Absolutely not. I mean, there are some real subtle places. So you have to kind of say, well, it's either orange or red, right? Now, if you're doing the limited palette, then you're going to just start with your red, the one red you have. So like, for example, if I'm going to just say, I'm going to try to mix this up here, and if I go down here on my palette, pick up just a little bit of that red, and of course I want to pick up some, I usually like to use my knife to mix because then I don't mess up my piles of colors as much. I can cut it out. So the first thing I might do is just get a red color and mix up some white. Just that much.
So Rob, is that Windsor Red Deep?
Yeah, I'm doing the Windsor Red Deep. Now,
Okay.
if you were going to do the setup that you want to try a warm cool setup like I'm doing and not a limited color, limited palette, then you would ask yourself, because you're going to have both warm and cool of your primaries out like I have, then when you ask that first question, then the second question would be which red or which blue or which yellow? Is it the warm red that I start with or the cool red? And sometimes you just have to start with something and experiment. But I would say, maybe you start with the cad red if you're going to do it that way. Then you just have to start with something. A lot of color mixing is experimenting anyway. And then the third question is, what is the value? Okay, so you're going to be bouncing back and forth between these three questions. And if you can understand and practice these three questions, you'll start to understand value, or color, mixing colors. So what's the color? Is it red, yellow, or blue? Matching. You're matching something. Is it red, yellow, or blue? Which red or which blue? If you're doing the warm and cool palette. If you're only doing this limited, then you just pick your red or, blue, if you're doing the limited palette, would be your black. You're not really going to probably start with a black, except if you do her hair, maybe. But if you're doing that limited palette like the Anders Zorn, then it's either going to be your red or blue. Your red or yellow, sorry. So red, yellow, or blue. And then you try to, what's the temperature and what's the value? Now, remember, we're trying to just shoot close this first time because there's color is nothing really until we set it next to something else. And that's why Paul Davis likes to do this this spot way of building it up, because he's kind of painting all over the painting. Elodie, do you have that portrait of yourself that Paul Davis did?
Yeah, I do.
If I don't know if people can see your, well, maybe they won't be able to see your screen, but maybe before we end class, you could show that painting that Paul Davis did of you. Or you could even send me, both you and John, why don't you and John send me an email of your paintings, your self-portraits,
Okay.
and then I can share them with the class. Let's do it that way.
Okay.
That might be my first stroke. My first stroke, what I'm doing is I'm keying in the color, and I can tell that's pretty strong, right? And sometimes if I'm working on a photo reference, some people will put a plastic sleeve over their photo references, and they'll touch the paint right to the photo to try to see if they can match the color. It's not necessarily as much as matching the color as it is as getting the good relationships of the colors we see up there. Well, obviously that's kind of too red for the cheek area. So what would I add to now? What do I add to that primary so that it's less red? There's a couple ways to do it. You guys that already know, some of you are new to color. Some of you have done this before. What do I add to desaturate any color? If I go back to my color wheel.
Some green.
Yeah, okay, so if you got one of these color wheels, it would be very helpful to get one, or you could just probably access one on the internet. You always look at the color that's opposite of the color you're trying to change. And the color opposite is what we call the complementary color, and that will desaturate the color. So if I were to add green to the red, it will desaturate it. It will take some of the red out. Even if I have some kind of a blue-green or a yellow-green, it'll take the red out. Now, blue is kind of a triad from red, but even though it's a little closer to the red, the blue will start to make it less red. But the problem is it'll make it more what color if I add blue to red? Make it more purple, and I don't know if I want purple. Maybe in the... So anyway, another principle is if you want to desaturate a color, you can desaturate it basically in three ways. Add a complement, the white, or the black will desaturate a color. Now, if I add black to this, why would I not want to add black to this? What would happen if I added black to this?
But it would darken it.
Yeah, it would change the value. I don't want to change the value. Now, sometimes you have to change the value. But...
Plus, if you're using ivory black, there's a lot of blue in it too, and it kind of makes it a purple also.
Yeah. So that Anderszorn, if you guys just want to practice with just the red, yellow, and black, which some of you might want to just try and just experiment with it, you'll get your kind of bluish with that ivory black if you have that. It has kind of a blue tint to it. Yeah, and this black I've got out here is actually not a black at all. It's a Payne's Gray, and Payne's Gray is very cool. It's very blue. But I just don't have my black here, so... I need to desaturate this a little bit, but before I do that, I can see that if I added, because this coloration is a little bit less red, it's a little bit more orange. So what can I add to it, right? I can add a little bit of yellow.
You can add raw umber to it.
Yes, you could add a little bit of raw umber. Raw umber is another one that's kind of like a modifier. I try to mix other colors that are the actual primaries and not too much of the modifiers, and I'll tell you why. If I use too much of the modifiers, especially burnt sienna, then you're going to have a painting that looks like leather. It won't look like flesh tone at all. It'll look like leather. Now I don't know if raw sienna does that as much. I know burnt sienna does because it just looks all warmish, and So you want to be really careful with your modifiers like burnt umber, burnt sienna, raw umber, raw sienna. You want to be careful not to overuse those. Some artists, some painters will not even put them on their palette for portrait painting because they know that they'll use them too much. I'm adding some more white to it because the white also desaturates it, and I know it needs to get a little lighter. I can see it's quite a bit darker than it needs to be. So I'm going to spend probably a lot of time on just kind of some color theory, but no matter how far I get on this painting, it will give you enough principle that you'll be able to do it. Now I've got that color, and if I were to...
Elodie, could you mute your mic? It keeps bouncing back between you and Rob.
Oh my God.
Oh yeah, make sure
sorry.
everyone mutes your mic. That's one thing you have to keep remembering. It's hard to remember. Thank you for that. So you see now how that, so I'm just showing you how I'm trying to mix and match some of this area in here. As a matter of fact, yeah, so this color is a little bit more close to that, but if I put it up there, it's just way too intense. Now, here's one thing to think about. If you're going to err on the side of intensity when you're first starting the portrait, err on the side of being too intense. It's a lot easier to muddy up a color than to bring color back out from the mud pit. It's a lot easier just to, because I'll lose this intensity as I keep painting, but I don't want it too intense. So you'll notice that how much white is used in this process. And, you don't want to be stingy with your paint. I'm going to try to get the paint out a little bit more here. There probably comes a time when I just start using my brush and I get lazy. I'm going to paint more and talk less now. You can just see what I'm doing on my palette. Hopefully you can see my palette. I'm going to pull up just a little bit of that modifier, that yellow. It's a little darker, but so what's the color, red, yellow, or blue? What's the value, and what's the temperature? Those are the three questions you want to ask yourself each time. And once you start getting stuff laid down there, you'll start asking the question, is that a little more blue? Or is it too yellow? Or is it too red? So you're still asking the same questions. Is it a little too much of this, too much of that? Now you see how that's closer to the flesh tone that I'm looking for.
So, Rob, are you adding any medium to that?
Not much. I've got a little bit down here, but if I get too much medium, then I got this wet soup. And I want to err on the side of keeping the paint thin. I want to err on the side of keeping the paint thin and a little bit dry, not thick. So even if I were to, I wipe my brush, and even if I were just to put some color in like this and just start building it up, that's okay. Now,
is that the dioxide yellow you use?
A little bit, yeah, because it killed the red a little bit. And
Yeah, when you just put in dioxide yellow?
Yeah, this yellow oxide here. Okay. It's a little more to the flesh tone I see there, and you'll see it, especially in these fair, kind of fair, lightish skin tones. You'll be using a lot of your white paint. Now, I could probably, for now, all of this along here is about the same. So I might put a mark here. I'm going to do it how I'm going to show you guys just how I do it, sort of tiling up a little bit like Paul Davis. But if I were doing a here, I'll do a little mini one up here for you. I'll do a little mini one for you up here. This is going to be like a really bad, or I should say really quick poster study, like Tony Ryder does. But so if I were thinking in sense, and then I've got my shadow side of the face over here. I don't know if you can see this little thing. That's her hair here, and her eye level. But I could actually paint this whole area here with that warm, just like this. So here's the warm area of the face right there, all the way across. I'm gonna, if you can see that little painting, I'm gonna paint with that, and I'm gonna show you both ways. So you can actually go through and just cover and somewhat cover some of that. Now let's match something up here on the forehead, right? So if I were to keep working with this pile, I could, but I think I'm going to make another pile and bring out some white, just add a little bit of, I can almost get away with not mixing any medium with my paint. But what's the color of her forehead? Red, yellow, or blue? You got a choice of one of the three, or black.
Ish.
Say that again, John.
Reddish at the top.
Yeah, but
Because it's closer to the bone.
okay, but let's say you only can choose red, yellow, or blue.
It'd be reddish.
Okay, is it more
Let's see, let me think.
is it more reddish or more yellow?
Bluish to get it to be cooler.
Yeah,
The red and the yellow are warm.
yeah. But I want to start with one. I want to start with one of the primaries. This is just a way of thinking about it. So you're right. Either red. I sort of think of it in the sense of what I'm seeing, and maybe your camera's seeing a little different. I see a little more of a yellowish, and so I'm going to just go with the yellow. And if you're doing the limited palette, then you would just add a little bit of that yellow. I've got the white mixed to it. I know that's going to be awfully light if I touch it there or even over here. It's not bad, but like John's saying, I might have to cool that off a little bit. I might cool it off first with the yellow oxide. I want to get a little more paint out. I want to get substantial paint out because I'm going to be using this in other areas of the painting. So I tell my students that 70% of your time for a painting is spent down here and about 30% is up here. Or maybe 75-25. That's how you get to what Sherry McGraw does. What Elodie was talking about was Sherry McGraw says, who was saying it just Sherry McGraw leaves the paint stroke and doesn't mess around with it? Because she does all of her work down here and figures out what she needs to do, and then she goes up there and, it's done. But I could touch this up here to give myself an idea. Now I look at that. Now I put that down on top of my painting. I know there's a lot of underpainting, so it's going to influence that color. But if I look at that color, is it too yellow, too red, or too blue compared to that? And I know you guys are looking at a computer screen, but that's the question I want to ask. I'm trying to teach your principle. So I set that down and I'm asking myself, is it too yellow? Is it too red or too blue? You only have three choices. Or you could say maybe too gray, but let's stick with the colors for now. Is it too yellow, too red, or too blue for that?
I think it's too yellow.
Okay?
Can you pull that to your reference? We can't see the top of the head.
Just right here above her eye. Can you see that above her eye?
No, we can't see the top of her forehead.
I can see it.
I see it on my screen, and I don't know. You should be able to see it.
I see it, John.
Maybe there's a setting. Do you have a setting, John, on your computer?
Yeah, well, go ahead. Just keep talking.
Can you go full screen on your computer? Maybe that'll help. Because my computer is showing that you should be able to see right to there. Cuts off right there. Is what it should be for everyone. Is anyone else having trouble?
Yeah, I'm okay. I just turned.
Okay. So if that's a little too yellow, then what can I mix to a yellow to desaturate the yellow? A purple, or some kind of a dark red. I could do a little bit of a dark red or blue violet, or I could use that black. You know, I could use that black that's sliding down now on me. If I'm doing the let's go to the Zorn palette. If you're just doing the Zorn palette, you could mix a little bit of black, but you got to be careful, because if you mix too much black, then it really grays things down quite a bit. So you make sure everyone's mics are muted. I'm getting some back feed somehow. There, thanks. So you see how that cooled that off. You see that note there that I stuck next to that one, how that cooled that off. Just a little bit of that black to the yellow. And I'm going to add, there is a little bit of red in there, but it's not quite as much red. So if you're doing the limited palette, the Zorn palette, then you're just moving back and forth between those three colors, right? You're just finding something that's, you know, close. And I think that's pretty close. You can see that right there. I don't know, can you guys see the differences between those three on your camera? Can you see that?
Yeah. It's subtle, but yeah.
That's what I'm trying to, yeah, that's what I want you to look for. It is subtle. It is subtle. And if you're working around in this tiling way, it's going to get a little cooler as it moves over to this direction anyway, and a little darker right into the shadow areas. So we've got this. So if I were to paint that on the forehead, if I were doing it this way, I would paint a stripe right there on the forehead, all the way across. It's just like this would all be that. If I were doing it a big value, I would do one big value right here. I mean, one big color shape. And I'm going to shape it just a little bit more. I'm going to do a little miniature one. Talking about doing small ones here. I'm going to attempt to do that to show you the principle. Now, let's move down here. I'm moving all the way around. Let's see. So down here, if we go to her chin or her cheek or above her lip area, this area, what is that, red, yellow, or blue? Red, yellow, or blue in this area? Or what's it close to?
It's kind of a greenish blue.
Yeah. I mean, it is kind of a grayish there. If we had to start with one of the primaries, which one would it be, though? I know there's a lot of gray, but if we would gray down one of the primaries, would it be red, yellow, or blue?
Blue.
Blue would make them more like a man having a beard.
Yeah, we could do with the blue. We would probably, if I took that light blue, you know, we could start moving that towards the direction by adding some of the other two primaries. I think when I look at this, it's more of a yellow than it is. I would say it's more of a grayish yellow, but I would say it's kind of more of that yellow, kind of like up here on the forehead, with blue added. There's blue to it. So let's go ahead and let's just kind of take both. I've got that light blue, and if you're doing the Zorn palette, then you're going to take some of your yellow. And then you're going to mix some of your, just a tiny bit. If you're going to do that Zorn palette with red, yellow, and black, you could even use blue instead of black, one of your blues. You could try that. Then you're going to start to get that kind of greenish tone, but you can see that's quite cool. I mean, look how that's almost like a sort of a green, and I set that up there. So if it's too green, it just starts what do I have to add to it? Right, you get the idea. I'll go back to the complement and add a little bit of red back to it. Boy, I added too much red. See, if you overshoot it, sometimes then you just have to, that might be closer to what I think though. But I think if I added this a little bit more of that blue, grade it down a little bit, and the value down here is a little bit less. Oh yeah, that's better. You can see how that's almost a dead-on match. So you see how I got that? There's a little more blue color or your green, and I can put some of that in there. Now, if I'm doing this direction, if I'm doing this way, a place for the forehead, a place for the eyes and the nose and the cheeks, or under the eyebrows here, and then the place for the bottom part where the mouth. Remember those poster studies I was showing you guys? You could do it this way. So there's some of her neck right there. Okay, so the one thing about doing it this way, you can already see a relationship of what these look like together, even though there's a lot of underpainting. Maybe what I ought to do is at this point get a little bit of that hair, mix up the color of the hair. Now the color of the hair, you know, if you go red, yellow, or blue, well, that's kind of hard because it's really a dark brown or a dark gray. So that might be a little bit different, you know, to say, well, if I were working with primaries, let's say if I were working with a limited palette, you know, a red, yellow, and the black, what could I start with? You know, which color could I start with if I were doing the hair, for example, trying to match the color of the hair? Any thoughts?
Black.
You could start with the black, or if you're using, say, I mean, maybe you see a raw umber there, a burnt umber that's pretty close. I mean, her hair might be like a burnt umber. So rather than, if you're using a limited palette, doesn't mean you have to be strict with yourself. Now, you can be if you want, but you might find that maybe a burnt umber might be a good color for something, like usually in maybe a hair or something. But even still, I'll show you how I'll mix up a burnt umber. So if I start with the black, like John's saying, and then if I added some other color to it, it's going to get a little lighter than that black. Well, I've got a choice between red and yellow, if that's my limited palette. I'll pull in some of this yellow, and let's see what it's going to turn. Now, what's interesting is what color is the yellow and that black making me here? That's interesting.
Green.
It's interesting because that's what Matt was saying, is that some of the blacks have a tilt to the bluish side of things, more of a cool side. So if I want to match that color, what do I have to go to? Well, I only have one. If I'm doing the limited palette, I only have one color left, right? Pull in some red. If I'm doing the limited palette, pull in a lot of red. See, I've already got a burnt sienna. I just made myself a burnt sienna right there. You can see that. Some of her hair is that kind of color. And a lot of her hair is the color of my underpainting. So if the color of your underpainting is close to someone's hair, then I would just leave it for a while and maybe approach the hair a little bit later into the painting if your values are correct. You know? So let's leave that for now for the hair. Let's move on to something else. Let's try to match something else. Let me see if I can paint a little bit more and talk less now. Just see if I can show you guys what I would do from here. I got kind of three piles going here. This is the middle of the face pile. In here, this is the forehead pile, and this is the kind of down in the cheek and mouth area pile. Look, the underpainting is almost just right for that middle value right there. I might just leave that. Then I've got to go over here. I'm going to add just a little bit of this dark. If I'm doing a limited palette, I'll add a little bit of the Payne's Gray or Black and darken it to get, see, I got to that value there. I can get rid of that line now. If I keep adding Payne's Gray with the limited palette, it'll just get really super gray. I don't want to make gray flesh tone, so I'm going to add a little bit more of the color. It's going to get darker as it moves across there, and I want to match that. But there's more color in it than my underpainting showing, so what you're doing, if you're going to do the limited palette, you're just moving between 3 colors, and so you're just a lot of experimenting. See, I'm up there testing it. I keep testing it. I don't know if that's picking up, but it's a little bit more yellow than my underpainting. It's just a tiny bit lighter. So you can see I'm going crossed. And some of this might be good for down in here. Try some of it. Now, before we get too far, let's take a look at the shadow. Matching colors in shadow is maybe the most challenging thing to do because it's already dark. So if I were to see the shadow of her cheek here or even in the nose, is that red, yellow, or blue? If you had to choose. Or which family? Can you see that very well on the photo?
I would say red.
Yeah, it's definitely red. Now, if you're using the expanded temperature palette, then you would ask, well, which red, the warm or the cool? It's in shadow, right? Doesn't mean it's always warm or cool, but
It'd be warm.
yeah, that could be a warm red. It could be because it's reflecting up some of the light. It could be the cool. I could probably go with either way. Just for the fact that it's darker in the beginning, I'm gonna take the red and start with that. Now, obviously, that might be close to the value we need, but that's way too red. So what do I add to it to kill the red? Well, if I'm doing the limited palette, I can just add some of the black and yellow. This is if I'm doing the limited palette. You see how I knock back the red, and if I get that, if I test something in there, I can see that's a bit too hot. Meaning the temperature is a bit too hot or too intense. So if I'm doing a limited palette, I'll pick up a little bit of that black. Or if I'm doing the other palette, I'll just try to find a complement. I'll try to find a complement. Or if I'm using this green, this is why this green is so nice, because I can pull this green in here. This is for you guys that might want to try this. Then if I put up another stroke right here, you can see it's not so hot. I don't know if the camera's picking that up very well or not, but I kind of like that for the shadow. It needs to be just a little bit darker and a little bit grayer. Once I find a shadow color, I might like that. I could paint that in. It's a little light, but again, if you're going to err on the side of shadows, that they should be too light rather than too dark. It's a little darker right up in there. Probably something similar over here, where this starts to turn into the shadow, because this is the blood vessel area. There's going to be more kind of that red color in those cheek areas. Don't see it over there a whole lot. Some of that reflected light is actually working well for my color from that underpainting, actually. It's kind of interesting. So sometimes I try to find what else is that same value or color. Okay, so is it red, yellow, or blue? And if I were up here painting this direction with the shadows on my little painting up here, And if I had some of my, lines coming through to see where my nose is, then I'll go right over top of that paint with some thicker paint. You see? And reestablish where those shadows are. Thinking of those eye sockets again. The shadow side up here. Go ahead.
Once I was told in this workshop that warm shadows recede and cool shadows advance. Is that right? Advance.
Say that again. Say what you just said again.
I was told once that warm shadows recede and cool shadows advance.
Huh. I never heard that. It seems opposite to me. It would seem to me that the warm shadows would come forward, but I'm not sure. I have to think about that. Usually warm temperatures come forward, but it really, let me tell you the way I think about temperature is rather than thinking that, because the fact is actually, any of the actual colors can appear different depending on what it's sitting next to, right? So if you've got a color that's sitting next to, if you've got a warm color that's sitting next to a cool color, that red color is going to look warmer than it really is because it's sitting next to the cool color, right? So I think more important than matching these things is what is it sitting next to and what's the relationship of that. See how I'm doing the big values here. I'm going to show a little bit more of this down here in the. See, I cooled that off because this is in the. But you can see how the face is starting to turn form here as I'm painting big shapes over. So I had the big three shapes: the forehead cool, into the nose area warm, into the shadows down here in the face, and then I break them up into smaller shapes. So that's one way you can do it. This is another way where you're tiling, like Paul Davis was teaching me, and I'll show you what he did, a portrait of Elodie. It's really quite nice. That I'll send that out to everyone. Now, in the lip area, so this is enough. This is really enough to get you guys going because this is obviously their lips are kind of more of a reddish color, but you want to be careful not to make those too red. But if you're doing a limited palette, then I pull that red out and I get a little bit of my black, and you can see that it kind of toned down that red. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to match the color. I'm trying to match the value that I've already got up there. That's why it was so important for you guys to do that value study painting while you were looking at color reference, because now you're laying the color and you're matching the value with your color, but now well, you guys try to paint and talk at the same time. Okay. So think here. So the light color of that lip, it's a kind of a cool. So if I'm going back to my split palette, if you want to try the warm cool palette, and that's a little bit more of a cool, but I'm nonetheless I'm following the values, and I'm modeling it. And then as I go back to the other planes, I can just calm that color down, and if I'm doing the limited palette, you can see that the limited palette is not that daunting if you guys want to try that. It's not that daunting, and we'll get that value in here, you see. And I'm still turning the form. See how I darken that so the form of that lip starts to turn. Okay? So you guys start to get the idea here we're getting a little bit more out of time. I'll try to keep working on this, and I'm recording this with my iPad, but these are the kind of principles, and you just go around, and I can see some of this shadow color that's sort of reddish right underneath her eye here, for example, and I could put some of that there, and there's some of it going on over here. Just kind of put a brush stroke in there and leave it, and this gets a little darker underneath the nose, so if I have to get something a little darker, I'm just trying to show you a couple other little things I do, turning the form. And if I go back to this color that I have of the nose, for example, this area, I can start to fill in if I've got what's correct there, and I can start to fill in those areas here with little strokes. You could drag the paint off your brush here. My paint is a little bit dry. Well, not dry, but not wet. It's kind of what I call a dry brush. You can see how you can start to, once you've got the color, the general color that's correct in those areas, then you can start, putting more of that into these areas and getting those forms happening. So this is the idea. And then even around the eyes, there's, following all of the little value patterns. That's why it's so important to have those little value patterns so that you can follow those as you start putting in the color. This is a shape here that's in that. So I add a little color to that shadow because I can see that reddish. So you can see how we can start to add the color, and the same thing with this. If I were to go up in here and take this this darker lip color, upper lip here, and then these shadows here, this kind of thing. So either way, there's different ways of going about this. There's even other ways than this. Okay, well, that's the time we have for today.